Hello, beautiful beings. Christy Wood Giles here, joining Dr. Margaret Evanow, who's going to share some of the topics I love to talk about and to share with people. And I'm very excited because she has really such a interesting connection of background. And if you've heard of some of the references I make when I'm talking about health and wellness and happiness, Dr. Evanow really has the background from all aspects, the training, the doctorate, the understanding, and the lived experiences that I'm so excited she's here to share with you today so that you too can feel the value of this information and be able to understand it from whatever angle you come at. So, Margaret, welcome today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really think it's a important thing that we kind of combine our knowledges and our life experiences too, because I think that's really where we learn application. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. I think when we can understand a concept from different perspectives, that's why I think it's always really helpful, even when we disagree with one another, to just
Mhm.
listen to the different perspectives, because sometimes we'll pull pieces and put it together, and all of a sudden it will make sense to all of us. So that's great. So, as we're touching on your background, could you give us sort of a quick? I know much, I understand this concept, and clearly you have it too, where little pieces over the parcels of your life have come together to make this sort of field of interest for you, part of your specialty. And so, could you give us a little background on all the different pieces that came together to make you the quantum specialist that you are?
Absolutely. So, uh, when I was probably 18, 19, I landed on some quantum physics information, and I found it absolutely fascinating because I've always had a hunger to understand what we are as human beings. We seem like we're animals that are at the top of the hierarchy, and we've got things going on, but we also have such a vulnerability to suffering. And when I landed on quantum physics, I started to really put some pieces together, and that's what took me through quite some time because I think they say I'm the new 40, which puts me up there a little ways nowadays. Um, so I ended up going into psychology and counseling and working with people for quite some time in a whole bunch of different ways. I spent 13 years working in child welfare, kind of on the front lines with CPS and working with families and children that have experienced trauma. And that also kind of changed how I saw how we learn how to live and how that changes everything in our life trajectory and how we can unlearn that and learn something new. So at some point, I decided to go back after I got my master's degree, quite some years actually, to get my doctorate. And that was also a expansive experience for me. I learned ways of seeing how we interact and why we interact that I had not gotten at my master's level. So all along that is the thread that I have never stopped being fascinated by what quantum physics is showing us and helping us to understand about the fabric of the universe, but also the fabric of us, right? There's no difference between what the universe is made of and what we are made of. And so at some point, I decided that I would step into a hybrid of those two. My love of counseling and psychology and understanding human being behavior and thinking and emotions and quantum physics and how we would apply that to us at a real level, right? Not the high pie in the sky theories, but what on earth does that mean for me as a person living my life? So that's my journey in a nutshell.
I find it so intriguing. The very basis of why I found it intriguing is that it was really a huge aha moment for me in my long journey of healing from chronic Lyme. was that there was something more than just the physical healing that had to happen here. And I often refer to it as a mind body, and even take it now a step further, soul connection, as well as I think people relate to it sometimes as what's going on in our nervous system and the messaging
Mm.
that we're receiving and sending. But I think it's even really actually quite more profound than that. Could you give us a little bit of, if you're sort of to give the layman's term of when, because I say I often don't use the term quantum because it throws people off as it's something too complex to really grasp, but it's really
Mm.
not. Could you give us sort of the general layman's term of how you would explain that to someone?
Sure, absolutely. So all quantum means is the smallest aspects of what is here. And regular, traditional physics is about the big stuff, right? The planets and the galaxies and all of that jazz. But quantum, when we look at, and this is something that you will get in high school, every high school teaches this. They don't call it quantum, but every high school teaches this. They don't go past a certain level, though, right? So they teach us about an atom. What is an atom? It's got a little nucleus that has protons and neutrons, which are electrically charged. They call them particles, but that's a misnomer. They aren't particles, they're charges. End of story. Sort of like if you have, if you have a taser, at the end of that, what you going to get? Is it a particle? No, it's a charge. You're going to get zapped, right? So protons and neutrons are just charges, and around them, swirling this way and that way, are electrons. And that's quantum. End of story, right? That's the smallest kind of piece of us. Now, quantum physics has gone even below that level and found that there are things called quarks and qubits and all sorts of things. They're tinier and tinier and tinier pieces of light, charges, and that all things are made of atoms here in this physical world, which means all things are really just charges with a lot of space in between them. It's phenomenal to try and wrap your head around if you had a little tiny atom and you measured the space between the electron and the nucleus of it. It would cover such an immense amount of space if you put it on like a Earth basis. There's so much space and some charges here. That's the bottom line. You want to know layman's terms, you are made of charges and space, and that's it. And what on earth do we do with that?
It's true. And so I'll explain kind of how it came to me in the sense that, being in biology and focused on nature and
Hmm.
wildlife, I really grasped that a lot of things were happening because of energy. I mean, that seems like common sense, right? When you're
Right.
talking about those things in those terms. And then also being in sport management, nutrition, fitness, we talk about energy all the time, from do I have enough to do this, how do I get more, how blah blah blah. But it was really the concept of the fact that my thoughts had energy, that
Mhm.
I wondered what, like, why that was left out of the equation. Maybe I missed it, but generally was sort of. And so I really grasp the field you have put together, because they were life changing for me. And
Mhm.
even when I thought of the term, we talk about emotion, it's
Right.
energy in motion. So why is that concept of our thoughts having energy, our thoughts sending signals to our body, sending signal, I mean, really energy is signals, right? They're
Hmm.
messages, signals.
Absolutely.
And so we're receiving them, creating our
Hmm.
thoughts, we're sending them from our thoughts, we're sending them to our body. And when they're not in sync, and or in the way of what we want to create, how we want things to do, like for me, it was just simply, I wasn't thinking in a way that was helping my body heal. I
Mm.
wasn't thinking in a way that sent the right signals for it to repair something. I got discouraged. So I just imagined all that was bad. I was sending those messages. Um, I wasn't, and also those thoughts were draining my energy from really
Right.
simplistic terms. And so I really realized I had to pay attention to every signal, every thought, everything I was receiving, everything I was sending. So much so that I got to a point where I literally analyzed every little piece of energy coming to and from me, but also coursing through my body to have this huge realization. And I'm going to make this very simplistic. I was 100% working against myself
Yeah.
at all
Yeah.
times.
Without knowing it.
Yeah. And so, can you talk a little bit about why you think that piece would have felt so foreign to me and maybe to others, and sort of how important you think all of that is and how we exist, live, and thrive?
Hmm. So I think in the area of medicine and biology, there is this tenet of mind-body connection, right? There's a lot of research on that. And the research often talks about them as separate things.
Mhm.
There's a mind and there's a body, and somehow they're connected, and one has impact on the other, or vice versa, right? Body can have an impact on mind.
Yes.
Um, so here's how we start applying that basic quantum piece of really there's not much here but energy, little energetic impulses and lots of space. There is no difference between the mind and the body. Both are energy. Now, we have the amazing capacity to have senses, right? A sensory kind of experience. But that doesn't change that what we're made out of is at the lowest level, at the tiniest level, energy and lots of space. So, mind, we don't really have a great definition for that in psychology because it's kind of ambiguous. What is mind? Is it consciousness? Is it this? Is it the brain? Is there blah, 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 blah. There is no difference from a quantum psychology perspective. When you look at what we're really made of, the fabric of what everything is made of is energy. And our experiencing in our what we call body is a sensory experience. And we're energy. We have emotions, we have thoughts that there's a electrical field, they can measure it outside of our brain. Where does that come from? Well, our thoughts are electrical impulses that follow along on tissue called neurons. And then when they get to like a separate gap between the with this neuron and that one, they turn into chemicals, which are made out of molecules, which are made out of atoms, which are made out of energy. And then when they get to the other neuron, off they go as an electrical impulse again. And that creates an electromagnetic field around our head. But our heart also has an electromagnetic field. Tons of research on this through Heart Math Institute. And that really, it's like, I think 500 times bigger than this field. So it is the generator of a lot of information, electrical information. We are walking electrical energy beings. And we have this amazing capacity to, I love this thing. I like to say this is not nice and solid, but it's all electrons and protons and neutrons just like I am. And it has a field around it as well. Isn't that interesting? So no matter what we're interacting with, whether it's what we perceive as our body or our mind, which we don't have really a good definition of what that actually is. Some people say it's the brain in action. And I would say it's just another word for our experience of sensory beingness, right? We're alive. We are alive. We are experiencing things. And sometimes what we're experiencing is that our body is not well. So if I think thoughts that say, this is terminal, everything within me is listening. And they'll all that electrical information will say, "Oh, this is terminal. This isn't, we're not really on the live long and prosper path, right?"
Mhm.
Our cells are listening to what we are feeding them electrically. Our thoughts are electricity. And our nervous system is all electrical impulses. And so that is fed to every tissue in our body. If we are saying this is terminal, or I think when I was reading your chapter in Dare to Dream, you were talking about how, I gotta do this, like, right? It was that push energy that, I have to have it, which implies I don't have it. I don't have it. If I have to try and get it, I don't have it.
Yeah.
And so that message changes our outcomes and our experience with this thing we call our body. Um, most of us in life have had some kind of a health issue, crisis, condition, and what we say to ourselves, what we determine to be the truth about that changes our outcomes.
I wholeheartedly support what you're saying, and wish, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to you, because I wish, sometimes we just don't have these detailed conversations with people we love and care about, or people we're helping.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to get all of this across in a short amount of time from my
Yeah.
experience. Um, but I wanted to touch on two things you said there. One being that when you talk about, my background, my usual way of being was to push myself, right?
Yes.
To conquer everything, to never give up. And the one really, and I think so many of us do operate like that right now, that it's just about, if something's difficult or something's not working, it's because we have to go harder, we have to. And if we're stressed, we just need to push harder, do more, and then we won't be.
Right.
And most of the time we also believe that there's something really wrong with us when things aren't going well. But the truth is I was missing the signals from my body back. It
Mm.
was telling
God,
me
that's
to
good. Yeah.
rest.
Yeah.
It was telling me to, so as much as I was figuring out what signals I was sending it, my personality, and I think many of our personality, is telling us, ignore that, push through, keep going. And we don't really realize how profound our body messages are. That,
Mhm.
if we think that we're convinced, we're hypersensitive to something or focusing too much on something, but there's no incorrect messaging coming back.
Right.
How we might perceive it might need some work, but there's a message coming back that has to be
Mhm.
listened to. And what I found was beautiful, because I too had done some research with the Heart Math Institute. Oh, so profound. And because my background was nature and
Mm.
wildlife, the really strong connection I made one day was when I was looking at what they had determined was the frequency of the heart. And so they could actually now track that energy you're talking about emanating from our heart. And the concept that really many of our organs have their own brain, their own consciousness, their own thought pattern that is then emitting a level of energy, but that it matched the one we found in nature.
Mhm.
And I instantly thought to myself, oh, all of a sudden, all of this makes more sense. Now, interestingly, I had also studied the health benefits of nature in my master's. This
Mhm.
did not come up. So I thought this was a pretty profound piece of very strong science that had been tested and recorded
Absolutely.
and published many times over. Why was that understanding not there? I mean, it makes more sense to things like grounding and, stress relieving. And people all agree with that when it comes to nature. But this was a really profound piece. And so I'll just take this one step further, in that all of a sudden I realized that when I was conflicted, when I was challenged, when I didn't have the answers, that if I went to my heart, that was the most natural frequency for me. Also, a very healing frequency,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly. So, when I was grappling with, should I push through? Should I try this? Is this treatment or medicine working for me? That if I went to my heart, there was a very good chance of me getting a very honest answer. And yet, I was, I had the sense that I was actually being selfish. The
Mm,
concept that if go to your heart, what you love, what feels good, was actually being sort of airy fairy, selfish, not really focusing on all the information out there and the expertise that was out there. And so it was interesting that so many people then also go to nature when they're conflicted and challenged, and they find answers and balance and all of that. And so all of these pieces kind of made sense. They all came together, that when we're in that space that might be termed grounded, might be termed listening to our true essence, our heart, whatever it is, that there's a lot of knowledge to be found there, a lot of the right answers for us, when there's so much information out there suggesting there's only one right answer for everybody. I
mm,
don't believe that to be true. I definitely believe that we are meant to gather and listen and speak to experts and collect as much data as we can, but at the end of the day, how that comes together for us has to be something that comes from inside of us. And so I know I'm babbling here, but I'm so excited when you say these things, because there is real truth to that feeling we get from nature, that healing frequency, to listening to our heart. And can you just go into a little bit of that from your practice of how you help people and guide them through all of
absolutely.
this with that information?
So I do have a fair number of clients that have health conditions, right? And they're trying to figure out what to do for themselves to heal, or at least to recover to a certain level. Um, and one of the things that you said, you go to your heart, right? So a lot of times people have never thought of asking their body, wherever the condition might be, wherever the pain might be, wherever the discomfort is, what are you trying to tell me? And so that's an actual practice. So it's called somatic therapy from psychology's perspective. Um, but I like to take it a little bit further, and rather than just having how a description of what you feel there and things, I actually ask people to take some deep breaths to kind of settle into their body, scan where they feel the most discomfort or pain or something that feels unsettled. And that can be, listen, anxiety. It can be anxiety. So sometimes they feel, oh, there's a flutter here in this part of my chest. Let's go there and see if you can't just settle into that feeling state and ask, what would you like me to know? What would be most helpful for me to know? Never has it failed that something incredible came up, and people at the end of that are like, I don't know what to do with that. Well, it's you communicating with you, right? And if we learn how to listen, we interpret pain differently. Pain is a message. Pain is the body trying to get our attention and say, "Hey, hey, hello. Something happening over here and I'd love some help. I'd love you to take a look at what you've been storing energetically in this space of your body." So epigenetics is one of the more kind of trendy kind of things to talk about. It's fascinating because ultimately what we know now, no, not our learning of or we think, but we know is that in what we call the tissues of our body, if we've had trauma, an incredibly stressful event happen, or even micro traumas, We call them everyday traumas, right? The coworker that you go to work with that keeps looking at you over the and mad dogging you, and you are just like, what is the problem with this? Our body stores that unless we do something with it, and that turns into toxins and sludge in our tissues, which then leads to inflammation, which often is associated with most of the very chronic, debilitating disorders that we have in medicine. So, what we call mind body connection is very important for us to understand that whatever we experience, however we frame that, if we do not process that in the way that it needs to be processed, if we just say, well, there's nothing I can do, I just have to take this mad dogging every day from my coworker, I will have some effect in my body from that. I will store it. All of us do this, me included, right? Just because I'm a quantum psychologist doesn't mean I'm above the way things work. And we have to do something with that stored toxin after a while. It turns toxic, it turns sludgeous, it slows down how our cells gain energy, gain nutrients. It slows everything down and we break down. That's how we break down. But we can change that process around. We have to learn to listen, though. We have to also take a deep breath and face what we're afraid is there.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, and I get this because I'm a human being too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love what you just said. You actually gave me shivers because I had this moment. So I went about 3 years, I guess you could say, being misdiagnosed. But really, what was happening was, they couldn't really find anything, and
Mm-hmm.
I discredited myself.
Yeah. It
So,
happens.
yes. And so at the end of it, when you finally get a diagnosis or sort of feel you're on the path to recovery, I had this moment where I thought to myself, I have to figure out what it was that I could go 3 years and be convinced it wasn't anything major. That I could also go from running a half Ironman to being bedridden and still convinced it might just be stress,
Mm-hmm.
as well as how did was I so completely disconnected from myself that I couldn't that physical change wasn't enough to convince me that something was wrong here, whatever it was that was wrong, just that there actually was something really wrong here. And instead, just ignoring it, just keep going, just do life as you're supposed to do. And I realized that, and it's exactly what you said, and I share this advice with people all the time, is that I never actually checked. I never stopped to ask myself, how are you really doing?
Mm-hmm.
That doctor just told you there's nothing wrong. How do you feel about it? Instead, it would be like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, move on, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so I made a commitment to myself, and I really feel it's exactly what you were saying, but it's really the place we have to start, is that I would stop each day. Now, again, like you said, I don't do this perfectly, but my intention is to stop each day and do a full body scan,
Mm.
see where I am. And I actually was just teaching on this yesterday with people with nutrition challenges, is that to stop and ask myself where there may be challenges and what I can do to support. So with people with gut issues, I encourage them put their hands on their gut.
Mm-hmm.
You got to send it love. You may not like the way it looks or how it's operating, but the truth is it's done a lot for you. And with gratitude, we need to recognize that. But then the next question has to be, what can I do to support you? Almost to the point where we have to pull the pieces of ourselves apart so that we can look at them,
Mm-hmm.
reconnect, so that then they start to work together again. And so I love that that's the exercise you talk about, because, and you said too, there's always an answer. And I too have never had anybody who didn't very quickly, so people who don't even feel that they get
Right.
messages, or very quickly, there's one thing that comes to mind right away.
Yes.
And it might be something they should eat, or maybe something to take a break from. Or
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was just to stop, listen. And if it was putting a heating pad on something that hurt, I mean, it can be very simple. Go have a hot bath. But it was never a misdirection of any kind.
Right. Right.
And the hardest message I think anybody has to take in, so like you were saying, that the traumas that we push down or the messaging that we ignore, is the one that across the board we choose to ignore at most, is to not look after ourselves. No, the self-care messages, they're
Mm-hmm.
really hard for people to respond to, or for
Right.
us to believe we deserve it. And so if that's the most challenging thing, and yes, probably the most profound thing we will do, why do you think that is?
Why is it the most challenging thing?
For us to do anything kind of self-care related?
Yeah. I think because our general consensus as a society, and I would say maybe a world society now, right? Because the pandemic has shown us that we are not separate countries and we're off on our little islands and we can be separate from each other. Everything connects and is impacting each other. So the messaging that we've had is that success is wealth. Uh, Working really hard and succeeding at whatever you work really hard at, never taking a break, work harder, like you said, all of those packaged messages are that's what we're supposed to do. And that's passed on every generation. It gets a little tweak to it and a little different version of it, but it's still the same message of life is hard. You're going to have to work really hard. You may not really make it, but if you're gonna, you are gonna have to work really hard at it. I I I just am always in awe at how many uh, motivational and inspirational reels on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram are about how hard things are and how you better just get your dukes up and get out there and fight. Okay, you got to fight. That's the messaging. And if we take a break, well, then we're losing time.
Yeah.
The reality of it is that nature has a very ebb and flow kind. It grows. It has a springtime where everything grows and blooms, and then it matures, and then it relaxes, and everything kind of comes down, and it takes a rest over winter. There is an ebb and flow to how life cycles are, and we act as if we're not connected to that. Well, we kind of are. We're in the big field of the earth. We can't really separate from the earth as far as we know without lots of apparatus around us and some big machines to take us out. So we act as if that's not real or impactful to us. Uh, One of the things I think in the last 10 years that has been most helpful for me, health wise, is to realize that I had so much push energy in my 30s where I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to do I have to. And my health condition in my 30s and my mid 40s was about if you don't slow down, I'll slow you down. And I got slowed down. I'd crawl into bed going, okay, I'm not gonna be able to do today. Rather than, wow, what if I just built into my day breaks and a good ebb and a flow. Our work days, some people are working 10, 16 hours a day. Nurses work 12-hour shifts, 3 to 4 days a week. And that, I mean, we are over exerting ourselves and there's no time left. I mean, I had a client just on Tuesday where we were talking about, well, why can't you take a break? well, I've got this and I've got this and I've got the kids and I've got that and a bit and it was all about everybody else. And I said, well, that's really great. And you're exhausted. So how's this working for you? The equation isn't working. You can't give everything and not take something back for yourself to rest, to recuperate. It's what the airlines tells us all the time. American Airlines has it right. When that little bag comes down, you better put it on yourself first. You have to take care of yourself first, or you're going to be no good to anybody else at some point, including yourself.
Mhm.
Right? So that's one of the only places that we get that messaging, right? Is American Airlines. Put this oxygen mask on yourself first. But in work harder, meet the deadlines, uh, beat Joe across the cubicle, uh, do better, do more, do harder, go home and work. Make sure the laundry is always done, make sure the house is always clean, make sure the dishes are always done, and you're supposed to look pretty while you're doing it. I've never been able to master that last one. I'm like, I don't care how I look if I have to do all this work. The bottom line is our messaging as a society is not to ebb and flow. It is to push through, to be a hard worker. That's what makes you a good person. That's the messaging.
And this, because of that messaging, I feel like we're set up to fail at something because it's humanly impossible to achieve the level we're looking for in everything,
Mm-hmm.
meanwhile missing the purpose of everything.
Yeah,
But that sense of failure is going to be prominent because we're looking at it from that angle. And
right.
it's really unfortunate. A lot of the people that I work with, it's health related as well as sort of weight loss related. And unfortunately, I think it has a bit to do with how the world's changed over the last few years. And I say that, we sort of sat at a chronic stress state here, but
Mm-hmm.
now we're at a chronic stress state up here.
Right.
And so we have to imagine that our body's operating like it is in a massive survival mode. Even on a good day, that's where we're starting from. So now everything else we're doing for ourselves isn't working the same way. We don't
Mm-hmm.
lose weight as easily. We don't heal from something as easily. The headaches or the sleeplessness are far more prominent. Even when in the past we might be able to sort of course correct for a couple of days and things fell into place, they're not now. But it's because we're
Yeah.
starting at such a higher place that we now have perceived as normal.
Mm.
And so things can't recover the same way they do. And same with when you were talking about cycles, when I was dealing with Lyme, it was treated as a relapse that now I look at and it was like, no, my body had done this huge amount of healing for me. It needed me to sit with that, to like recognize that, not to keep pushing for more.
Mm-hmm.
Let it regroup. I say, like the cycle of come back down, let it almost fall down a little bit so that it can build back up to go again another cycle, but further or higher.
Right. Right.
But we don't have that mindset. And I see so many of us are just grinding ourselves into the ground. We're frustrated because things won't work the way they used to. We're frustrated that things seem to be spiraling out of control in the exact opposite direction that we don't want. And I really think it has a lot to do with how things have changed over the past 3 years. But because they change so slowly, we don't realize that we're starting from a different place.
Yeah. And I think that we take, like you said, we accept this as normal. So if you look at the amount of information that's coming at people, just coming at people all day long, sometimes late into the evening, right? They're still on those computers and phones and everything, and they never really unplug from it. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it wasn't anywhere near this rate of information. And if you think about it, processing information is really what we do, right? We take information in, we do something with it, or we don't do something with it, we decide, blah, 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 blah. But when you have an onslaught of information all day long, all the time, new information, things I got to do, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I've got to think about that. Oh, I got to prepare for this. Oh, bad stuff is happening over there. What's that going to mean for we are in exhaustion mode. It's an overload, right? I mean, it's sort of like when your computer, when you have too many windows open, it crashes. It stops working on you. It says, hey, yeah, I'm going to shut down because I can't do this. And we do too. And yet we act as if this is normal. So I also talk to people about finding a way to unplug from things. There's nothing so powerful as turning off all your devices and stepping away to just sit down outside in a place that's comfortable. Maybe there's some pretty plants near you. The breeze is blowing, the sun's out, the birds are there, and just being. We do not know how to just be anymore. We're always up here doing, right? We're thinking about how am I going to prepare for that? Am I going to make it there? Blah, 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 blah. We don't stop.
And
People,
so
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I love that advice. And when people have tried that before, I think there's a level of discomfort that comes with it.
Of course, because they've been racing around like you you feel the impact of, okay, I'm not doing anything. What's wrong with that? Nothing. Actually, this is exactly what you need to do ever so often, right? Every day, I believe we need at least something every day that is just us being a moment, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, if that's all you see to give yourself. But we need some time to just be. And it's different than thinking about things while I'm sitting there or trying to plan things while I'm sitting there. The idea is, that voice that you're trying to hear from inside that's trying to speak to you, you got to sit down and be quiet for you to be able to actually hear the little whispers of, I don't feel so good. Or have you thought about not eating all that sugar? Right? Those thoughts come to us. And if we're so busy with information coming in and us churning it around, we miss them. Right? Just like you said, sometimes those messages are what we can do, what we might want to take a break from, what we might shift around, but they have to have some quiet in order to surface and get in contact with us. If we don't want them to scream at us, then we might want to do that every day. Kind of just sit and be and not really try to plan out the rest of our lives in that moment. Just be. You'd be surprised the amount of information that then starts to come up from within. And some of it is just beautiful stuff like, oh, I just love sitting here. Those birds are so beautiful. It's gratitude, it's appreciation. And that I can tell you changes our energetic set point. Those are powerful places to be. We don't give ourselves time to do that.
Very powerful places to be. And yes, I say Lyme wasn't just a scream for me, it was the slap because I wasn't even listening to the scream. um, and
I hate
it's
those slaps.
yeah, it was like, I'm going to knock you flat because you won't
Yes.
learn to stop. And I can't believe for how many years I really fought even the messaging with that. I think too, sometimes when we stop, it's uncomfortable because um, it sometimes can be not the most loving thoughts that come up, or it can
Mm,
be the traumas that we've had that we've sort of pushed down and tried to ignore. But and so I always say to people, you can trust the thought if it is more loving and supportive. And so then they'll say, well, but I'm not getting these. And so then my response is, well, then you need to be more loving and supportive
yeah.
because you are having these
Yeah.
thoughts.
So think about it as that messaging that isn't so positive and loving is a snapshot in time energetically. And we never took care of ourselves in that snapshot of time. When that original event happened or experience happened, we just went, just suck it down. Let's keep moving that way, right? I don't have to worry about this. I'm stronger than this. I can keep going. Look at me. I'm a survivor. I'm like, great. I'm glad you survived, but what about thriving? Would you not like that as well? You can't thrive from survival. Thrival and survival are on different ends of the spectrum. And so that that information that's coming up that's like, oh, I can't stand you. Why do you act this way? Why does nobody like you? You're just not a good person. All of that stuff that might bubble up is an invitation for you to actually process those things. Find a way to let them go, right? As an event comes in that's emotionally impactful, it's meant to come in and we take in the information. Emotion is just information. It's like little feelers. What does this mean? How does that impact me? What's the information in this? And we take it in, and then we're meant to get the information and let it go back out, just like a wave, in and out. Most of the time it comes in, we go, I don't want that information at all. you know, and we stick it somewhere. Wherever is the place for us to stick it, we find a way to stuff it on in there. And you know what I find fascinating is most people do have a place. They have a place in their body where they store all the ucky stuff. And then they wonder why those parts of their body don't feel good. Well, they're first of all, they're like a closet that has the door's about to burst open because you keep putting stuff in there and there's no more room. But it's also after a certain amount of time, it becomes toxic to us, right? So those bubbling ups of things that are unfinished are really the body inviting you to, hey, did you forget about this piece? It's still here. And that doesn't feel good. I know that. That's why I say often we have to face our fear that there's stuff in there that we don't want to deal with. And yet, if we don't deal with it, it will deal with us. And that's not fun at all.
No, and I always say the other side of it is such an easier version of life, such a
Yeah.
more comfortable way of being with yourself. It's like when you get rid of all those little pieces that don't serve you, it's even easier to love yourself. It's
Hmm.
even easier to be in this world. And every time we process a piece, it's like a little piece weight came off. So it's always worth the work,
It
as much as
is.
it might not be a ton of fun right in the middle of the process.
Yeah.
But
So when I do my clinical work, my initial form that people sign, I put right in there. Counseling may not always feel good. In fact, the hard work that often we have to do can feel like pain. But if you go through the process and you deal with what needs to be dealt with, there is a better place on the other side, right? There is a recovery of our essence, our feeling alive again. There's this thing called post-traumatic growth. And people who have experienced trauma who actually go into it and work it out find a way. And I find it, just passionate how they choose to transform that into something that is life-giving, positive, and empowering. I worked with someone who had been attacked by a dog and they lost most of the functioning of their right hand. And they were so upset and angry at the couple that had the dog and the dog itself. And it took us about a year. And by the end of that year, my client said to me, you know, I never could have imagined feeling this way, but that dog gave me a gift. It helped me to see other places where I was damaged and holding on to things and not able to let those go, and it was keeping me stuck. and I was already unhappy. It was just a beautiful thing to see this person let go of the trauma information and change it into, but wow, look at me now,
Mhm.
right? It,
I always
and
like
people do
the
that all
saying,
the time.
that when you feel the discomfort, you know that you are entering into the zone of change because your body's never been there before. So it
Ah,
should
yeah,
feel discomfort. It's a
yeah.
sign that you're going somewhere you're not used to. So it, it always is sort of a piece of the puzzle, but worth the effort. Um, so, Margaret, I'm so happy to speak with you today. I did want to refer to the book is where I found you. And when I read your chapter, I'm like, oh, we had so many parallels in our interest and
Hmm.
your hiking experiences changing your life, as well as all of your information about quantum science. And so I know you have a lot of social media resources as well as a website and a free ebook, and you do coaching and counseling. So I will put all of those links in the bottom, as well as people will know how to get this book that we were
Hmm.
both have a chapter in. And I usually ask people at the end if there was one piece that they would like to share to guide people with the information. But I think you've given us a wealth of things to consider and practices to adopt to try and help ourselves. Is there anything that you think you would like to say that maybe we haven't covered?
It's just one little thought. It's a power thought. We've been told that we are animals on a blue and green planet. We're the non-hairy apes, by the way, although I like my hair. Um, but I don't want it all over my body.
True.
And that's really what we are, and that's all we are. And I would ask people to take a second look at that. The one thing about quantum physics, when we really look at it, only that everything is made out of energy in space at its smallest foundational elements, is that we are in a vast field that's all connected. And we are energy, and the field is energy. And the energy contains everything we could ever want to know, infinite information, infinite experiences. And to quit playing small, like a small hairless ape on a blue and green planet.
I love that. Thank you so much. So I'm going to leave us with that and sign off with my usual message to everybody that you are a beautiful being exactly as you are. And when you embrace your true beauty, prioritize your wellness and self care, you shine even brighter. And this, my friends, is what illuminates your path to your fullest potential.